Okay, so I'm formally beginning the course, and I'm starting with kind of setting the terms and clarifying the rationale of the course, but there is also an underlying theme in setting up the course and explaining the rationale, and that has to do with what is signified in your course outline, the culture of sociology and beyond. Right? I'll come to the idea of the culture of sociology towards the end of this set of presentations, and maybe a class or two I will be taking on this. And in the PPT that I've already shared with you, I've identified some key terms which are going to figure in my presentations, such as practice of inquiry, the idea of heuristics, fusing theory and method, culture of sociology, hermeneutics of suspicion, post-critical social science, between epistemology and ontology, and so on. These are the key kind of ideas that will configure my presentation, and it might be useful for you all to kind of be a little more attentive when a particular key word or a key idea is being invoked. I mean, these key terms that I've identified are not these, they are not the slide headings, although in some cases they do correspond, but nevertheless, the key terms are kind of the critical keys on which you can, kind of try to link up ideas that I will be sharing with you as part of the, of trying to explicate the rationale of the course, right? Okay, now, and I think I've already told you this, that you all have done courses in theory, sociological theory, both classical and modern, right? And you've also done courses in research methods, both quantitative and qualitative methods, okay? And in the process, right, in the process, you have been exposed to a number of theories, theorists, and also strategies of research, right, etc. Okay, okay. Now, in fact, if you want to approach, or to work with the insights of a particular theory or a theorist, I mean, if you want to work with the insights of a theory or a theorist, then what it means is to approach the world according to a certain set of procedures and assumptions that each standpoint contains, right? So thus you can have a Durkheimian approach to theory and methods. You can have a Marxian approach to theory and methods. You can have a Foucaultian approach to theory and methods, or a perspective from Foucault, or a perspective from Bourdieu, a functionalist, neo-functionalist, structuralist, symbolic interactionist, phenomenological, and so on, right? Quantitative, qualitative, ethnography, sociological ethnography, and so on, right? So in a manner of speaking, you have been exposed to an array of theories, theorists, and strategies of research, whether quantitative or qualitative, right? Although I think the emphasis a lot of the times in sociology, in departments like ours, is more on the qualitative side of research tools rather than on the quantitative side of research tools. In fact, whenever I invoke such a introduction, I'm actually reminded of a famous statement from the late sociologist, famous sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, right? Okay, and in one of his, I don't know if it is an interview or an article, I don't quite recall that, he speaks of two kinds of practitioners, in social science. I mean, two kinds of practitioners, scientific practitioners in social science, right? One, he says, is they think about social science and don't do it, right? Okay, so they're just they are just involved in meta-level inquiries about, what is to do social science, what is to do sociology, and so on. So they're thinking about the discipline rather than actually using the tools that the discipline invokes. Whereas there is another set of practitioners, according to Bourdieu, right, who do social science and don't think about it. I mean, they're just using the tools of sociology or social sciences more generally, and applying those tools, gathering data, and then trying to interpret the data or analyze the data, and so on, right? And so what Bourdieu is invoking is that there are, I mean, and please note this is somewhat stereotypical or prototypical, that there are two kinds of practitioners: those who think about social science and don't do it, those who do social science and don't think about it, right, etc. And clearly, for Bourdieu or somebody in a working within a Bourdieu framework, this is a problem. I mean if you're not able to inform your doing with thinking, or test your thinking by doing, as it were, clearly that dualism between thinking and doing is something of a problem for sociologists in the mold of Bourdieu. And I think a lot of the aspiration that underlies this course is primarily to bring the thinking of social science and the doing of social science together, right, etc. That's why the fusion of theory and methods, right, that the course is seeking is essentially an attempt to bind the doing of social science with the thinking about social science, right? It's one thing to think about practice; it's another to practice something, right? To do something, right, etc. Okay, so that's why I think I often find this Bourdieu quotation useful, or this Bourdieu citation useful, to actually introduce students to the kind of considerations that are going to operate in this course, right? So how do we bring the thinking? I mean, when you think about social science, right? I mean, some kind of a meta-level inquiry, right? I mean, what does doing social science entail, right? I mean, when you think about what doing entails, you're doing some kind of a meta-level reflection. I mean, people speak of this as reflexivity, but I think there is more than just reflexivity involved in thinking about social science, right? Whereas there is also something active in the process of just doing social science, applying the tools of social science, gathering data and interpreting it, and so on. So how do we bring theory and methods together is an important challenge, right? So and in fact, you cannot separate the doing of social science from the thinking about it, just as the thinking about it must be, feed into the doing of social science. I mean, at a more larger theoretical level, this is the link between theory and practice, right? How do we bring theory and practice together, etc. And you can have different levels at which the theory-practice link can be established. I mean, Marx tried to establish a theory-practice link along a particular axis. Durkheim would work along another axis. Weber would work along another axis, or even Bourdieu, as to take a more contemporary figure, would work along a different axis. But the challenge really is how to bring the thinking and doing together in and formulating this as the basis of the practice of inquiry. In fact, let me be a little more confessional here. In fact, when I was toying with the idea of titling this course, one of the titles that I had in mind was this title of the practice of inquiry, right, etc. okay, and then I kind of mulled over it for some time, and then later fixed on the present title of Knowing the Social World: Epistemologies for the Social Sciences, right, etc. Okay, now, so in other words, okay, I mean, in other words, the key issue, the key consideration before us is how to move between the path of a theory or a theorist, okay, and apply the theory or the theorist, the ideas of a theorist, right? So how are we actually going to fuse our training in methods and theory, right? That is the challenge in trying to design a certain practice of inquiry, which I think is crucial, right? I mean, in fact, ask this question: what does it mean, right, to follow, or to engage in research, and in doing that research, follow a particular theoretical model, or a particular social theorist or a philosopher, right? Okay. So in fact, surely many times there is, I mean, many times we read theories and theorists, read philosophy, okay, but I think we actually don't translate that reading into also an applied question of how to apply that reading or the lessons of that reading in research, right? In critical thinking, and so on, right? Etc. Okay. Now, of course, somebody might say that philosophizing and theorizing are very abstract enterprises. Okay, and as an abstract enterprise, philosophizing and theorizing is quite different from how to deploy abstract ideas in research. In fact, the challenge for this course is precisely the latter: how abstract ideas can be configured in the process of doing research. That is the larger challenge I think the course is also responding to. That's why I mean, to repeat the formula that I have already indicated for you: how do we fuse our training in theory and our training in methods? In fact, one of the things which I think a lot of the sociology curriculum has something very positive about it, and you can contrast it with other disciplines in the social sciences or in the humanities, you will find that right from the beginning, the sociology curriculum, across institutional national sites, has had an emphasis on theory and methods, right? I mean, in any sociology program taught anywhere in the world, you will find a significant component of the course work dealing with theories, and a significant component of the work dealing with methods, right? And some bridging efforts are also of that kind. And I think that's a real positive thing insofar as the sociology curriculum is concerned. I mean, you take a political science curriculum, or you take a history curriculum, or you take at the graduate levels, right? At the level that you all are in, postgraduate or graduate levels, etc. You will find that the aspiration, the ambition underscoring the sociology curriculum is the right one, right? Of course, I think it's one thing to have a curriculum. It's quite another to translate that into a pedagogical form of practice. And I think in the pedagogical translation of this curricular detail of theory and methods together, I think a lot of lacks and failures have come in. In fact, one of the things that, and I think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last class, one of the things that puzzles me is that actually students come up with extremely interesting ideas, right? I mean, or as research problems, as certain problems that they want to tackle or engage with, and so on. But they don't know how to go about it, right? Or they pitch it at a level which is absolutely crude. They don't think with sources. They don't think with So it's important that when you formulate a research problem, you must also have a source or a set of sources for answering it, right? I mean, it's one thing to have a research question. It's quite another to have also a strategy for engaging with it. And many times, I think we postpone the strategy question towards and think that refining the research question is crucial. And I think this should be actually simultaneous and so on. So that's why I think the practice of inquiry, right, requires the thinking of social science and the doing of social science to go together. The theory and methods must go together, and so on, right? Now I want to be very clear, and I think I've made this point also in the PPT that I have shared with you, that the course is not designed as a how to do research course, right? I mean, how to do research course would be something you would have gone through in your methods courses, right? Or in the conventional method sense, I mean, using tools of analysis that come as part of quantitative or qualitative methods and so on. Although that element of using tools is also there, implicit in the ways in which the course will orchestrate itself, right? Rather, the effort in our course, right, is to give one the tools and the dexterity, the skill to think through the process and practice of social scientific knowledge, and in the kind of revised course outline, I've tried to keep that dictum in focus, right? And I think I've structured revised the course outline in that light, right? That's why when we talk of fusing theory and methods, right, and I'm using this in a more heuristic mode, right? In fact, you want to read more about heuristics. I mean, there is that reading that I've shared with you from Andrew Abbott. He speaks of the heuristic mode for social sciences, which is a certain attempt at bringing reflection and practice together, right? The heuristics of inquiry is about how you go about putting together an inquiry, right? And in the process of assembling the inquiry, there are certain kinds of guidelines that you observe, and in the actual doing of inquiry, there are certain lessons that you draw which feed back into the ways in which you design inquiry. So in fact, a lot of it is having to do with design. How do we design our research in such a way that the fusion of theory and methods, so heuristics, I think is a kind of a middle term which avoids the tendency to reduce theory to methods, or see methods as applications of theories, right? Etc. So I think the word heuristics for me is that way much more suggestive than just questions of theory and methods, of using theory and methods, because it's actually trying to tell us, it introduces a certain form of attentiveness into the process of inquiry, which I think is very crucial. I think there is we are talking about theory as a resource, right? Methods as a resource, right? And somebody can ask, resource to do what? right, etc. And I think that's an important question. And how, I mean, to do what should also kind of feed back into the ways in which theory is practiced as a resource, or methods is practiced as a resource, and so on. I mean, I think most of us are very comfortable with the idea about methods as a resource, right? But theory as a resource, I think most of us take theories as some kind of explanations, right? I mean, to see something as a resource is to, is to introduce a certain flexibility into the act of theorizing. An act of theorizing is an act of trying to explain something, okay? But the act of explaining is kept open-ended, right? Etc. So I think the word heuristics, in a sense, is for me at least much more suggestive in saying that, look, we are not trying to reduce theory to methods, nor are we reducing methods to just an application of theories, etc. Right? In fact, one of the, in fact, I'm fond of making this point. This famous historian and philosopher of science, right? Who has also done some very outstanding work in the history of statistics, on probability theory in the philosophy of mathematics, and also in the study of classifications, scientific classifications, as indeed social classifications, etc. This Ian Hacking has this statement. He makes this, which is actually from his book, The Social Construction of What. That's the title of the book, right? And in the early pages of the book, The Social Construction of What, Hacking formulates a dictum for the practice of inquiry. And I think that dictum, in a sense, is crucial to understand the kind of the kind of emphasis that the course is bringing. Okay, Hacking says, don't ask for the meaning, ask what's the point, right, etc. Okay, and I'm going to keep this dictum open-ended. I mean, there is a certain context in which Hacking formulates this dictum, and I'm not going to outline that for you. You can read Hacking if you want, if you're curious about what this dictum means. But there are different ways in which one can apply this dictum, right? Don't ask for the meaning, ask what's the point, right? I mean, of course, to say don't ask for the meaning does not mean necessarily that you should not seek after the meaning of things, right? Etc. What Hacking is saying is addressing meaning is insufficient, or revealing the meaning is insufficient, getting at meaning is insufficient. In fact, if you have to get at meaning, then you have to actually get at the point of the meaning. I mean, who is saying it, why is it being said, and so on, right, etc. And of course, this dictum will find different applications in the context of the course, but I think it's an important point. I mean, and in fact, towards the end of the course, when we deal with sociology and history, I will actually invoke this even more forcefully in the considerations that follow, right? Okay. In fact, acknowledging this dictum, don't ask for the meaning, ask what's the point, right? When somebody says something, right, you can always try to interpret the meaning of what is being said, right? But it's equally imperative to disclose meaning, that you also understand why or how or in what context it is being said by the person, and so on. So there is a larger study of meaning that is involved, right? And I think we will get some measure of this when we move into the second part of the course on on the interpretive dimension of the social sciences revisited. And I think even there, there are certain kinds of revisions, and we will be bringing into the general mold in which the question of theory is being raised. At this point, I think, acknowledging this dictum, don't ask for the meaning, ask what's the point. I mean, in fact, I can ignore the hacking name, etc. But I think I just had to acknowledge that the dictum is taken from hacking, and hacking has a particular understanding of what he's articulating there. And in fact, the book's title is Social Construction of What? So he's trying to engage with construction, constructivism, and so on. And we will speak about that as we go along, etc. But even independent of it, even independent of the name that is associated with this dictum, I think the dictum itself is quite interesting, right? In fact, because I've revealed the name, the dictum will get constrained. If I hadn't revealed the name, the dictum would also, kind of free float in more interesting ways, right? In fact, I've experimented this with students. When I used to teach in the integrated program, I've taught there for 5 years. In the last 5 years, I've not been, last 5-6 years, I've not been part of the integrated program. I used to teach the course in, Introduction to the Study of Society. And in fact, I would take a quote. There is a famous quote called, "There is no society, there are only individuals and families," right? It's a famous quotation, not disclose the name of the person who uttered it. Although, of course, people would Google the quotation and get the name of the person who uttered it. But because they got the name of the person who uttered it, their understanding of the quote begins to reformulate itself. But independent of it, the quote is an extremely interesting one, right? There is no society, there are only individuals and families, right? In fact, if you want to understand the history of sociology, perhaps you can work at the history of sociology, at least French sociology, through this quote, through this quotation. Although, of course, it was uttered in a very different context, and so on. So I think these are key frames, right? In the context of our course, the dictum, don't ask for the meaning, ask what's the point. Okay, as I said in the handout, acknowledging this is imperative. If you have to be responsible for our acts of knowing, right? Knowing is an act. Okay, it's active and both acting upon itself and acted upon. It acts upon others, right? And consequently, if the process of knowing, our act of knowing, is an active act, okay, then somewhere along the way there have to be certain kinds of guidelines that can inform it or can make it much more suggestive. I'll come back to this a little later, although if there are certain observations you want to make at this point in time, I would be more than happy to hear from you. Any comments, any observations up to now? Okay. I think right. So let me with these introductory observations move into because if you notice, the theme is called Setting the Terms and Clarifying the Rationale of the Course, the Culture of Sociology and Beyond, right? Now, what is this culture of sociology? Okay, I think it's important to articulate what is this culture of sociology, right? Okay, and I think it might be interesting for us in addressing this question of what is the culture of sociology and what is to move beyond it, or what are the effort that is required to move beyond it, I think are critical kinds of questions. And of course, moving beyond need not imply that you are necessarily implying that something is restricted and therefore you're moving beyond. Moving beyond can be adding to also what has already gone on before, etc. So I want to keep that beyond a little more ambiguous, etc. Now, I think there are different ways in which we can think about the culture of sociology, right? For instance, you'll have done a course on classical sociological theory, right? And somewhere there is a sense of sociology that is derivable from the formative course in the sociology curriculum, namely classical sociological theory, right? It's a formative course, right? What we understand as modern sociological theory, I think definitions can shift. But in terms of classical sociological theory, I think there is a general consensus that Marx, Weber, and Durkheim are the classical trinity, and you may add one or two other names, a few other names to it, or etc. But Marx, Weber, and Durkheim would be sacrosanct, right? Etc. And although, in fact, I don't know if you're, although in the course outline for classical sociological theory, these three are emphasized, but there is also an important name of George Simmel in your course. But unfortunately, I've noticed that many times, going through the three classical figures itself is quite detailed and so on. And there is a tendency to actually either work at Simmel very, very peripherally or perfunctorily, right? Which is really sad because Simmel is an absolutely interesting thinker and actually brings a certain load of emphasis into the culture of sociology, which I think is actually much more interesting, right? But let's keep that. That's an opinion that I'm expressing. Not many people might agree with it, etc. But I think the ways in which we understand the culture of sociology is often traced back to the classical thinkers, especially Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, right? Etc. Okay. Now let me with that backdrop, on that backdrop, speak of the culture of sociology. Incidentally, the term that I'm using, the phrase that I'm using, culture of sociology, is borrowed from Wallerstein, Immanuel Wallerstein, and he invokes it in one context. What we mean, and what Wallerstein also means by the culture of sociology is some set of shared presuppositions and practices that define the sociological orientation, right? So if you're asked what is sociological, what is to be sociological, one way of answering that question of what is to be sociological is perhaps invoking this idea that I'm kind of initiating you into, namely the culture of sociology. In fact, Wallerstein himself, in explicating the culture of sociology, actually argues, okay, that this culture of sociology was revealed by those who we in the present often present as the formative thinkers of the discipline, invariably Marx, Durkheim, and Weber, right? Okay. Now, let me explicate the idea of the culture of sociology, in the ways in which somebody like Wallerstein also actually explicates it. I mean, there are three minimal, and I stress, Wallerstein also stresses this, there are three minimal questions that any student of social reality has to address, right? Three minimal questions, right? And please note, I'm using that word minimal, right? Because you can always have additional questions, but what constitutes the culture of sociology, the essence of the culture of sociology, you can add to it, or kind of move further from it, etc. But the culture of sociology binds itself around three minimal questions that any student of social reality has to address, right? I mean, in fact, this is some kind of a baseline, a minimal threshold for any study of social reality, right? I will formulate it as three propositions later, but let me first give you the three questions, and I'm already there in the handout that has been shared with you, and I will just literally read it out for you. I mean, the first question: how is it that individuals hold particular sets of values and not others, right? I mean, what explains the kind of values that people or individuals give expression to, right? Etc. So how is it that individuals hold particular values and not others? And clearly, this is an important question, because when you observe, you find that people profess different values. People hold on to different kinds of values, right? So how is it? I mean, if we are all individuals, why do we profess the kind of values that we do, right? Etc. Okay. I mean, people with similar backgrounds are more likely, to hold similar sets of values, right? People from dissimilar backgrounds hold different kinds of values, and so on, right? And in fact, in a manner of speaking, right, this question of how is it that individuals hold on to particular sets of values and not others, right? Is a question that you can trace back actually to the work of Durkheim. Okay, and Durkheim, in answering this question, asserted the primacy of the social, right? That the social is prior to the individual, right? Etc. So the social explains why individuals behave or think hold on to the kind of values that they do, right? Etc. So if you want, I mean, Durkheim believed that if you have to assert the reality of the social world, right? And the social world is not reducible to the world of individuals, right? Although there is an individual world, there is also a social world, right? And to a large extent, you may have to use the social world to explain the individual world, right? Etc. So in other words, just as there are individuals, they also belong to groups, right? So there are social groups with explicable structures, right? I mean, so just as the individual is a reality, the group is as much a reality as the individual, right? So I think this is the first minimal question, and the answer translates into the proposition about the reality of social facts, right? Etc. And this line of thinking was greatly epitomized in the culture of sociology, in the work of Durkheim, right? Of course, in asserting the primacy of social facts, in his definition of a social fact, in his definition of the social, Durkheim went through a certain trajectory from the line of his work, from the division of labor in society down to, say, the elementary forms of the religious life. I mean, these are his pioneering works. I mean, the two big works that are there in between, there are all other important, equally important works, right? And so on. So the first aspect of the culture of sociology, which in a sense is a response to the question, how is it that individuals hold particular sets of values and not others, is that there is a social independent of the individual. That social exists. There is a social form that has to be addressed, independent of and autonomous from the individual form, right? But surely, somebody can ask this question, right? I mean, even if we assert, yes, there are groups, there are individuals belong to groups, so the existence of groups is as real as the existence of individuals, right? But then when you look at groups, when you observe groups, you find that groups are not characterized by a unity. They lack internal unity. There are divisions within groups and divisions between groups, right? Etc. Okay, and somewhere along the way, that yields the second question, which I think any student of social reality should be addressing, namely, how is it that groups, right, which are supposedly signifying a unity, because that's what makes a group. When you call something as a group, that means you're implying it is assembled together, put together as something unified and whole. But actually, the groups are characterized by struggles and conflicts, both within groups and between groups, right? Okay, so the social world is real. Yes, the social is real. The social world is real. There are explicable structures associated with the social, but the social world is also internally divided and conflictual, right? Etc. Okay, that's why the second question, right? How is it that groups, which are supposedly a unity, are in fact characterized by struggles and conflicts, both within and between, etc. This is where Marx comes in. I mean, if you were to trace the culture of sociology back to the formative thinkers of the discipline, you will find Marx actually trying to address this question, right? Of what explains the fact that the social world is internally divided and conflictual. How do you explain the prevalence of conflict and struggle at the heart of the social, right? Etc. Okay, so the second proposition is, the first proposition is the reality of social facts, or the reality of the social world. The second is the perpetuity, the perenniality of conflict and struggles, right? Okay, I mean, all groups, right? In fact, in the Communist Manifesto, for instance, although the Communist Manifesto is a it's a manifesto. So it's a manifesto means it's a call to action, right? But I think it's deeply interesting text, etc. Although, of course, there are also certain excesses that come with its polemical mode in which a manifesto gets to be written, right? Okay. In fact, the famous slogan which is there in the Communist Manifesto, namely the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle, right? Etc. Okay. So in other words, all social groups, all the social world, is consisting of conflict between and within groups, and so on, and and there is some kind of a hierarchical ranking between and among groups, and which explains the struggle and conflicts in which they get to be written, right? But then somebody can ask this question: why do we stop here? Okay, we started with the first proposition. The first question, how is it that individuals hold particular values and not others? Then we went on to assert through that question the reality of the social world. then argued that the social world, which is supposedly consensual or to be bound as a unity, actually is ridden with conflicts, right? So the perenniality of conflict, that's the second proposition. But surely, there is more to the social. There is more to the social reality or the social world than just its primacy or its internal division, right? If and in fact that's why it's there in your PPT. If the social world is real and involves conflicts, why don't all societies break up, right? Or destroy themselves? I mean, that's an important question. I mean, it's not as though that societies are conflict-ridden, but they still continue to exist. Although some societies can self-destruct in the process of the internal struggles and conflicts and so on, right? In other words, alongside conflict, there is also a prevalence of some kind of order in social life, right? Etc. That's why, go back to Marx's dictum, the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. And I literally I think we should ask the literal question: all societies characterized by class struggles? I mean, surely a lot of societies are characterized by class struggles, but many times struggles can get mediated by other kinds of mediations, right? I mean, look at India. You will find that it's very difficult to think about class struggles in India because somewhere along the way, variables like caste come in the ways in which they complicate the reality of social division and social classification and so on, right? So the next question is why do all societies not break up or destroy themselves if they're always characterized by conflict, right? In other words, I think even as we recognize conflict, we also must recognize the problem of order, the existence of order despite conflict, right? And in a manner of speaking, if you want to trace this question back to the classical sociological tradition, you will find that Weber is obsessed with this question, right? Weber, the kind of emphasis that he places on authority, on legitimacy, the question of legitimacy and legitimation, etc., clearly implies that just as societies are characterized by conflict, there is also order despite conflict, primarily coming through structures of authority and structures of legitimacy and legitimation that contain the conflict. I mean, in fact, Weber actually is trying to engage formally with this question of how do you go about explaining the existence of order despite conflict, right? Etc. So, and you will find in Weber's work a huge, a variety of answers to that question, right? Etc. So you find if this is true, then you have the third proposition. The first proposition, the reality of the social world or social facts. The second, the perenniality of conflict. And the third, the existence of mechanisms, of legitimation which contain the conflict, which kind of structure the conflict and not allow it to go out of bounds and so on, right? Etc. Now, in fact, Wallerstein points out that these three questions, which form the basis of the culture of sociology, clearly can be traced back to the classical heritage of sociology through the work of Durkheim, Marx, and Weber, respectively. Right? In fact, according to Wallerstein, this culture of sociology pervaded the discipline. From through the period of sociological theory from 1945 to 1970. Right? It's only after 1970 that there is some kind of a fracturing of that. That some kind of a deep-seated questioning of this inherited culture of sociology through a lot of historical sociological work, which Wallerstein himself pioneered, and other kinds of work that might be there. Right? But what is interesting, right? What is interesting is that this culture of sociology, which translates into these three questions, minimal questions that any student of social reality has to address. I think if you trace it through the classical figures, you will find that all of them were trying to answer those questions in kind of a historical contextualist fashion, right? They were answering to the problem of modernity, the transformations that modernity brought, and tried to engage with the challenge of modernity. Of course, Marx defined it not less as modernity and more as capitalism, whereas Weber tried to point out that there is more to modernity than just capitalism, whereas Durkheim was actually trying to argue that, look, modernity also requires, modernity is built around individualism, yes, but it also requires some sense of the collective, right, etc. So these are, the culture of sociology, if you want to work out more intricately, you will find that it answers in a historical contextualist fashion. But independent of the historical contextualist mode of answering the question of the culture of sociology, I think there is more interesting is that it kind of indicates towards the minimal set of questions that any student of social reality has to address, right? That's why there is something interesting, about the questions themselves, right? Which are part of the culture of sociology, and you can try to answer them, in a historical contextualist manner, in the way I've just indicated, as indeed how Marx, Weber, and Durkheim try to explicate it. Okay. Now, but what is important for me, right, is not just the questions themselves or the ways of answering them, right, but how do we bring theory and methods together in the context of these questions, right? Now that's why it's one thing to tread the path of a theorist, and applying the theory or a theorist, right? So of course, to apply a theory or a theorist, you have to tread the path of the theorist. But the path that a theory or a theorist clears, right, many times is not adequately attended to, right? In fact, if students are more interested, I can, I've in the last few days, I've been rereading a small book by Agamben called Signature of All Things. That's a book I've read often in the past, but somewhere the book, which as I'm reading now, it's a small book, 120 pages, 3 essays, and Agamben speaks about method. Of course, he's talking of a specific method there, what he calls philosophical archaeology. But independent of it, I think there are some very important considerations which are outlined out there. And I think what is suggestive is that the path of a theorist or the path of a theory, okay, is as important as what the theory culminates in, or a theorist says, right? And many times the path may be much more interesting than just the final utterances of a theory or a theorist, right? In fact, Marx, I mean, it's one thing to look at the theses of Marx, right? And a lot of his theses have had to be revised in the light of the history of capitalism, right? But the way he goes about setting up the thesis, the path that leads to the thesis themselves is etc. That's why it's one thing to take these questions seriously. It's quite another to answer them in a historical contextualist fashion. In fact, if you have to take these questions seriously, then there is a certain fusion of theory and methods that we need to be invoking in the context of these methods. So it's not in the context of these questions. So it's not just the questions themselves that are significant, and I've already said that these questions are minimal, right, etc. But I think equally crucial and imperative, okay, is the path of these questions, okay, treading the path of these questions and the answers that the questions themselves yield, right? It's important, as it were. I mean, in fact, it actually translates into two rules of method, as I'm fond of repeating. I mean, you can address a thinker in terms of what he or she says, right? But then you can also address a thinker or in terms of not just what he or she says, but also the pathway that led up to what he or she says. And the path is actually the question of method. I mean, the path is the real question of the fusion of theory and method, as it were, right? I think I will stop here for the moment, and I will, of course, there is something that we need to move beyond, right, etc. And I will take that up in the next class. And I think, and for the moment, I will stop out here. If there are any observations or comments or thoughts that you want to share with me, I would be more than pleased to hear them out. Otherwise, I think we will wind up our class for the day. Are there any comments, observations? Yes. Aishi, please go ahead.
Am I audible, sir?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I have, it's not a question, but it's a comment or an observation that it's been bothering me for quite some time, in the class. So the entire course primarily aims on how to fuse the idea of theory and practice. Now, if you see any classical thinker or any thinker, we have seen that they have also been inspired from a philosophy or abstract ideas. Then they have had their own methods, and what I'm trying to say is that they have also fused some philosophical or abstract ideas and fused them into their approaches, and somehow they've brought out their own theories. And if from this context or perspective we see what any thinker does, or how a thinker or a theorist have been writing their theories, wouldn't you say the idea of using the theory or practice is already a practice that has been practiced for a long period of time?
Yeah, of course. Everything. Come to think of it, Aishi, everything. You can always say that everything is a practice, right? You look at it. I don't know, in your modern sociological theory, you have a hand. I don't know if you all have been exposed to Althusser, right?
We did not do Althusser.
Okay.
No, I think we did. I'm not really
sorry?
sure.
Sorry?
I'm not really sure whether we did Althusser. I think yes, we did Althusser. Yes, we did.
Yeah, no. I mean, look at a figure like Althusser. I mean, in fact, Althusser will argue that theory itself is a practice, right? In fact, the charge against Althusser's Marxism was that it was a very theoretical Marxism, a very intellectual Marxism, and that goes against the very, I mean, it was believed that it goes against the very grain of Marxist thought that that practice means, right, essentially, trying to apply your theory to struggles on the ground and so on. And Althusser himself had an answer. I mean, in fact, he believed that there has to be class struggles as much in theory as there has to be class struggles in practice. So when he writes this book, Reading Capital, I mean, it's a captive. I mean, I am extremely fond of that book. Or his for Marx. In fact, in his prefatory comments, he actually makes this point that I mean, he gives a clarion call to Marx that we have had enough of struggling on the streets. Let's assert the right and the duty to study Marx and so on, right? So surely we are talking about forms of practice, right? All along, right? Yes. You see, but the point is, I think it's important to address. I mean, yes, we are talking of something more non-dualistic in trying to fuse theory and methods together. I agree. To bring theory and practice together, I agree that we are trying to be non-dualistic. But somewhere along the way, you have to recognize that there is a dualism that you need to fight against, that you need to challenge, right? So many times, I mean, that's why I go back to the Bourdieu quotation I began with, that there are those who think about social science and don't do it, and those who do social science without thinking about it, right? And Bourdieu himself, that's why you read any of Bourdieu's work, it's as much doing social science as it is about thinking about what does it mean to do social science. I mean, you read his outline of a theory of practice, or you read his logic of practice, or you read his distinctions, etc. You will find that there are very informed reflections on method, and there are very informed reflections on the nature of class, of class entities in the French society, and so on. So one is not disputing the fact that I hope I'm answering your question or your observation.
Yes, sir, you are.
Yeah. If you think I'm have a tendency to wobble around, so you.
No. I think reflecting on Bourdieu is important, because when I started reading Bourdieu during my graduation, I think from then I've had this sort of this botheration. I wouldn't call it botheration, but this idea that whether at all there is a dualism or a non-dualism, and sometimes I come to this conclusion that there is, and sometimes I don't, and well, there has been. So I think this course might answer.
Hopefully it'll answer to some of your predicaments.
Yes.
But see, I mean, again, there are issues which we can ask about Bourdieu as well, right? Etc. And I will, as we go along, maybe touch on some of those questions, right? As we go along. But the point is that somewhere along the way, when people do theory, or I mean, the average practitioner. In fact, in my recent kind of work, I've been trying to think about, trying to bring the reflexive disposition and the scholastic disposition together, right? And in fact, in my own work, I've been trying to articulate a fusion of theory and methods, which is actually an attempt to bring the scholastic orientation alongside the reflexive orientation, right? Incidentally, Bourdieu has some very, very pungent remarks to make against scholasticism, right? But again, and I'm sensitive to that, etc. But there is more to scholasticism or a scholastic viewpoint than that. So that's why I'm trying to indicate that, in actual forms of practice, even those who try to fuse theory and methods together sometimes don't answer to all the questions that are imperative in that fusion, right? I'm not saying, in fact, you may even still charge this course that, yes, in its aspiration, it tries to bring theory and methods together, but in its actual translation, it still keeps them apart, right? But that's a debatable point. We can strive, although the effort in the course, right, is actually to bring theory and methods together. Because these are, when they are taught as two streams, right? They're taught as two kind of parallel streams. Now, can we bridge them together? And how do we bridge them? Of course, that's an open question. And I'm not saying that the course achieves that bridging very well. But I think at least in its thrust and the rationale, the effort is to bridge them together, right? So that's why I think, I will speak about dualism and so on a little later. Because there are different forms of dualism, and it's not necessary that every form of dualism is necessarily bad, etc. And yes, in your opening remarks, you also referred to philosophy, right? A certain,
Yes.
etc. Actually, how many students know that, apart from writing all the books that Durkheim did, he also has a wonderful set of lectures on sociology and philosophy, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right? It's a wonderful set of lectures on sociology and philosophy, right? And then there is a larger context that is there. Of course, Marx and Marxist philosophy has a vantage point from which it presents itself, which is quite important and necessary. Weber, I think, is an extremely interesting hybrid, as it were, and there is a certain orientation to philosophizing that is there in Weber, which comes from the Neo-Kantian inheritance, but interestingly brings some important revisions through his sociological orientation to the Neo-Kantian inheritance that he works with, and so on. So surely, there is a certain philosophical backdrop to any thinker, and so on. Anybody? We'll get back to these questions, Aishi, when we go along.
Thank you, sir, for
Are there any other questions or observations or comments that people would want to make? Please feel free to.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Rose. Yes.
Sir, I don't know if I'm confusing everything here, but then I was just thinking about this, like a person who's doing research would
Right.
actually fuse theory and practice. So are you trying to say that there are people who don't fuse theory and practice? That is one confusion that I have.
Yeah.
And the next one is, so when I think about it, it feels like that it is a process that they go through when they do research. So it's like they fuse theory and practice, and it's kind of a personal journey. When I think about it, this is the image that I'm getting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm confusing between theory and method here, the basic things. I don't know what I'm doing. It's just
No, that's fine. No, that's fine. Incidentally, if you've confused theory and methods together, that's one way of fusing theory and methods, right? If you don't know what is theory and you don't know what is methods, that means you've fused them together. I'm just jokes apart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no. So I think see, no. Look. They may. I mean, see, even the most reflective practitioner of research, right, may fall short to some of the injunctions of fusing theory and methods together. The demand of fusing theory and methods together. I mean, so I'm, whenever, I mean, and this is the point that I'm fond of repeating. I think when we engage with theory or methods, engage with the best practitioners of theory and methods, right? I mean, for instance, scientists, I mean, the kind of image with which social science works of science, I think is so restricted, so, motivated and partial, that actually, there are some extremely interesting scientists that are. So I think it's important to think about, I mean, to separate a practice from its practitioners, right? And so I'm talking about a practice of inquiry, right, which brings, which attempts to fuse theory and methods together. Although in the actual practice of practitioners, there may be some falling short. I mean that, in fact, some of us may say, okay, the aspired for theory practice link is not done in a proper way. You can always make that criticism, but that's part of the intellectual deliberation, right? But the point is that we are talking, I mean, I'm talking about the most reflective practitioners. I'm not, I mean, surely, and I'm not again saying that there is anything like a non-reflective practitioner. I'm not even saying that. I mean, somebody might say, no, even somebody who just applies methods, right, just uses methods to collect data, is also working with certain assumptions, right, etc. No, but I'm just talking about an interesting practice of social science. I mean, there can be, so I am willing to grant that everybody is a reflective practitioner, but some practitioners are more interesting than others. And I think it might be interesting to ask why we find some practitioner more interesting than others, right? And and sometimes the question is not only because they say what you want to say, right? That's why you may find somebody interesting, right? A lot of social media is of that kind. No, it just corroborates, what somebody is saying, right? Or dismisses what somebody is saying. I mean, it's either or, as it were, right? Etc. But I think it's important that we think with a practice, and in the process of thinking with the practice, begin to articulate a certain fusion of theory and methods. In fact, when I teach theory to students, I teach theory as a story, right? I mean, because see, otherwise theory can be very challenging. In fact, in my own experience of guiding students, etc., I mean, theory often comes as an afterthought. In fact, when students come to me, he's a theorist. Therefore, we have to ask him, okay, what theory should we apply for our research? No, see, what I'm trying to indicate is that there is a certain understanding of theory that most of us consciously or unconsciously nurse, right? That theory is an abstract endeavor, right? It's and something difficult and challenging, right? But we don't engage with it. In fact, I teach a lot of theory as, of course, there is an abstraction in a theory, but I also teach it as a story, right? As some kind of a narrative that is unfolding and so on. So I mean, if you're Rose, if you're confused, that means you're in a manner of speaking, bringing theory and methods together.
Sir, it's something which we usually hear these days. It's like when you write something, you bring in a little theory, you bring in a little data, and then you mix it up and you get something.
Yeah.
That is a general understanding and general conception and perception that we get.
Yeah, that's true. No, but even that, what I'm trying to remind you is that even with that general understanding, even if you say that you bring some theory here, you bring some method there, you bring some data here, etc., and then you kind of put. There is an act of putting together, which is interesting for me, right? I mean, even if you say that, okay, let's bring some theory here, we'll bring some methods here, we will use some methods here, bring some data here, etc. I think there's an active act of, of putting together elements, and you're trying to construct something, right? And I think the course is designed to make that process of construction more self-conscious and active, right? Of course, ideally, we should not think about theory as one part of the portion, right? I mean, it's one element. I mean, I could give you very many other examples, but I think it's flowery examples, etc. But I think even if I go by what you're saying, which is absolutely true, I'm saying even there you can do something interesting, right? But unfortunately, because we don't think through the mix. In fact, in the history of science, and this some people might be interested to learn this, in the history of science, I mean, for instance, even Newton, for instance, it's not as though Newton did his science all the time, experiment and so on. I mean, he was also into alchemy, right? And alchemy was how to convert base metals into gold, etc. A lot of the witches who were burnt in the stakes in late medieval Europe were actually, later actually working with wonderful potions and so on, right? So what one is saying is that this mixture is interesting. In fact, I've just recently got a book which tries to look at political theory, doing political theory, okay, as composition. So theory as a composition, okay, and the compositional exercise is sought to be mediated through an understanding of films, right? So this theorist is trying to re-articulate the idea of political theory as composition through using films, Hollywood films, as illustration. So a film is also an act of composition, right? You're assembling many elements together in a film, right? Writing is also a composition. Theory is also a composition, right? Etc. So even I understand the spirit in which you made that point, Rose, but I'm just saying that even there, even something as mechanical as bring, okay, thoda theory laga diya idhar, or brought methods, use some methods. And that's why when students write research proposals, they say that a research proposal should have an introduction, should have research questions, it should have a scope of the research objectives, then what is that, method and all that, and conclusion. No, I actually think that formula is wrongly formulated. In fact, for me, a good research proposal or a statement of research should include 4 components. 1, the problem. What is the problem that you're seeking to address? What is the context? The context of the problem, which could be an academic context, it could also be a historical context. So the problem you're seeking to address, the context in which the problem presents itself, which it could be academic and historical, method, and what I call evaluation. These are the 4 components that you need to think with. And I mean, research questions and all that can be formulated in your research the problem. Okay, and the evaluation is, what is the significance of the work and so on. So I think this composition, putting things together, even if it is just, even if it is, even if it is, just a process of experimentation, I think even processes of experimentation have certain logics built into them, even when you don't have things, clear cut, you don't know what you're searching for, etc. Right? I mean, in fact, Robert Merton has this essay on theory and research, and I think some of you in your undergraduate might have read it. The reciprocal relationship between theory and research, and he actually talks about serendipity. I mean, that many times you discover things by chance. I mean, you never find what you're searching for, but you actually find something more significant, etc. I mean, that's why I'm often fond of telling students, go to the library. You will never get the book that you are looking for, but you may find some other book that is much more interesting or equally serves the purpose, and so on. Okay.
Sir, so we are actually looking at the act of putting things together.
Right.
We have the building blocks. We're just building something.
Right.
That's what we are trying to look at in the course.
Sorry.
So, sir, that is what we are trying to look at in the course, right? The act of putting things together. We have all the components. You're putting it together, like you said. So
if you want to reduce it to a set of injunctions, yes, I would go by what you have summarized. But there is, of course, more. See, look. You all have done courses on theory. You have done courses on methods. Right? I mean, okay, think with what are the kind of, and in fact, you have worked with different theories. You have worked with different theories and different methods. But in the process, there are certain things which appeal to you. Right? Certain things which don't appeal to you. Right? Ask the question why you find something interesting and why you find something uninteresting. Right? And try to work your way through it. I mean, in literal terms, it sounds very simple, but in practical terms, it is deeply transformative. Yes, Rauna.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So even though when we attempt to join, amalgamate theory and method together and understand the linkage, there does exist a hierarchy between the two, right? For instance, like in this case, I'm reminded of Gopal Guru's work on empirical Brahmins and empirical Shudras and theoretical Brahmins.
Right.
So I'm reminded of that. I'm thinking about that right now. So
right.
How do we contextualize that information, that concept in here when we are trying to conjoin these two theories together?
No, I think in fact, the theory experience debate is a segment in our course. You would have noticed.
Yes, sir.
Right. So we will come to that. A little later. Right. I mean that characterization of theoretical Brahmins and empirical Shudras, etc. The characterization, how do we address it, and so on. We will engage with it a little later. Right. See, there are. What I'm trying to indicate is there are certain frames. How do we go about framing our inquiry? I mean, a lot of it has to do with frames, right, etc. I mean, a theory is a frame, right? But then a frame enables and it also disables, right? I mean, just like a photograph, both includes and excludes, right, etc. So somewhere along the way, I think although of course in the context of the theory experience debate, there is a specific issue involved about standpoint, right? And I will engage with standpoint theory a little more systematically later in the course, because it's one of the most important theoretical resources that often is articulated as a important fusion of theory and methods, standpoint theory, right? Etc. And I'll engage with that a little later, right? But yes, I think it's important to look at particular theories, right? And I think when you assess particular theories, there are tools you can use to assess particular theories, etc. For instance, the culture of sociology that I summarized for you can be traceable to classical sociology, to the figures Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. But then you also find that the culture of sociology has been challenged within sociology itself. I mean, Wallerstein himself actually says that that somewhere along the way, this culture of sociology, which we inherit from the discipline, will have to be adapted to the new circumstances that we find, and so on. So there are certain restrictions in the context of which he looks at the culture of social. But the point is, that's why we said it's the minimal frame, right? I mean, and I kept emphasizing that this is the minimal frame, and from this frame we need to bring additional kinds of questions. What those are, maybe your theory courses would have given you some answers to, your methods courses would have given you some answers to, or some of the other courses that you have done in your coursework that might have given you, and so on. But specifically the standpoint theory we will engage later. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. I think I'll just switch off the recording, and then is there any questions that you want to ask, so that you can also be part of the recording? That Okay, so let me just 1 minute. Let me stop the recording.